In the first crucial step out of lockdown, schools reopen to all pupils in England tomorrow. Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales are to follow very soon. Secondary school children are being asked to wear masks and to test themselves at home. The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, joins me now. Welcome, Mr. Williamson. As we begin this conversation, could we just remind ourselves of one of the really important moments during the pandemic? Here is the Prime Minister and Rishi Sunak and others clapping for carers outside number 10. Did you clap?
Like everyone, the whole nation went out there to clap.
And do you think, therefore, that the whole nation agrees with the Royal College of Nursing that this 1% pay increase is frankly an insult?
Well, Andrew, what we have done is we set out one of the largest investment proposals for the NHS that we've seen in a generation. Just this year, an increase of £6 billion over the next few years. We're going to be seeing close to an extra £34 billion going into the NHS. We recognise the vital, important role that the NHS plays.
None of which helps, I'm sorry to interrupt, but none of that helps an exhausted, crying nurse. As Labour's Jonathan Ashworth just pointed out, Tory MPs voted through a 2.1% increase for nurses just before the pandemic, when they put themselves at risk and worked so hard. Do you think the nurses deserve more than 1%?
All we're having to deal with is an incredibly challenging economic situation where we've put forward a proposal, we've put forward what we believe that we can afford, and it's part of a process, and that will sort of be looked at. But really, Andrew, our focus is about making sure that we recover from this pandemic.
Sure. I'm sorry to interrupt. I will come on to that. But nonetheless, this award has caused a lot of anger up and down the country. And we all understand that from time to time, any government of whatever stripe makes a mistake. And the answer then is to acknowledge that and to change. Is this 1% immutable, absolutely carved in stone, or might you rethink it as a government?
Well, Andrew, we've stated, and as has been stated just last week, this is very much part of the process. What the government has put forward as part of an independent review, that's what the government has set out as just last week, but we are continuing to invest in the NHS. This is why record amounts of money are going to the NHS. But we are dealing against a backdrop, a very difficult economic backdrop, where we've seen a 10% fall, and we're seeing almost 750,000 people out of work. So, there's some significant challenges, but that was why we decided to exempt the NHS from the pay cap across the rest of the public sector, which is having a freeze. The NHS was exempted, and you're also seeing over 1 million people in the NHS getting a larger pay increase for the coming year on the back of some record increases in terms of nurses' pay as well as doctors' pay as well.
Well, the record increases amount to very little money when you look at it in detail. Nevertheless, can I ask you very, very straightforwardly, do you think nurses are wrong to see this 1% offer, after all they've been through, as an insult?
Nurses have been doing, the whole NHS, but also right across society, have been doing an amazing job and putting themselves to going to enormous lengths in order to be able to help us beat this pandemic. And we're incredibly grateful for that work. But this is why we're backing it up with the investment that we're putting in place on the NHS, supporting not just those nurses, but the doctors, but the whole system in order to be able to recover. But, I very much look forward to sort of seeing that continued investment flow into the NHS. That's the Prime Minister's commitment. That's the Health Secretary's commitment. The whole government's commitment to deliver on that.
Are all schools in England going to open tomorrow?
Yes, we're seeing a full reopening of schools. As you can imagine, Andrew, there's over 20,000 schools right across the land, so it's a massive logistical exercise. It's certainly not for the faint-hearted, but equally, as you have the opportunities, I'm sure you do and I have done, sort of go out speaking to parents, children and also teachers, how keen they are to be able to either be returning to school or to be welcoming children back into school. So this is our first step, our real first step in terms of moving out of national lockdown, and it's our schools that are leading the way. We always said that education was our national priority. It's the thing that we held most dear, and they would be the last things to close and they would be the first things to open, and that's what we said and that's what we're delivering on.
Susan Hopkins said a little while ago that opening schools could push the R rate above 1. If that happens, if we see a surge in infections, do schools stay open come what may?
Well, Andrew, we saw what the Prime Minister set out as part of a roadmap, sort of 4 key tests, whether that is the
I'm just asking a direct question.
So we very much factoring into the fact as part of a roadmap that actually schools will be staying open. This is why we've taken a cautious approach, because we intend it to be an irreversible approach, that schools will continue to remain open. It's so important for children.
So the answer to my
society.
The answer to my question is yes. Yes.
Will be remaining open.
Susan Hopkins also said that she hoped, I mean, she's a public health professional, she's not a politician, she said she hoped that schools reopened after Easter. As the politician in charge, can you guarantee that they will reopen after the Easter holidays?
Yes, schools will be reopening after the Easter holidays. And what we've done is we put in a whole series of measures. And we saw from September to December how successful we were in terms of controlling the virus within schools. We only had 0.2% of pupils who contracted coronavirus. But that was a whole system of protective measures that we put in place. But we've not just stopped there. Listening to the best public health advice from Public Health England and the best scientific advice, we've gone further in that in terms of face masks, but also importantly testing as well, which is something that hasn't been done before, but is one of the largest testing regimes that we've seen in this country. And
I want to ask you directly about face masks and about testing. Clearly, you regard face masks as absolutely essential to this, and yet you're not making them compulsory. It's just advice. If I, perish the thought, had a stroppy 16-year-old who said, "Dad, I am not going back to school with a face mask on, they can stick it," and he's with a group of other people who arrive in school without face masks, can the head teacher then exclude them? What's the legal situation? It's only advice.
Well, Andrew, I couldn't ever imagine you having a stroppy 16-year-old. As someone who has a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old, when you speak to them and speak to all children, they recognise that what we're asking them to do is about not just keeping them safe, but also their friends safe and their teachers safe, the whole school community safe, but also their families and the broader community as well. So we saw the wearing of masks in communal areas that wasn't compulsory but was strongly advised. We saw that between September and December, and it worked very, very well. We recognise we're asking people to go a little bit above and beyond, but it's just one of the many measures that we put in place to reduce infection, reduce transmission, reduce the chances of people getting COVID. It's just not one single thing. It's one of many things that schools are doing.
I'm just saying that given that it's a suggestion, as it were, not an instruction, that doesn't really help hard-pressed head teachers and teachers confronted with children who don't come in wearing masks and won't.
Well, Andrew, as I said, we saw the wearing of masks in communal areas that worked incredibly well between the September and December. We hope that this is a temporary measure as schools return, but then when we get to Easter, you'll have seen the rollout of so many more vaccines. You know, we're seeing the doubling of the number of vaccines that are coming in, being available to the NHS from 2 million to 4 million. And actually, you know, lockdown has been a measure of controlling this pandemic, but we're moving from lockdown to controlling this pandemic, not through lockdowns, but through vaccines and through testing, which means people will be able to do so much more.
Let me ask you more or less the same question about testing, because these lateral flow tests aren't hugely accurate. They're quite invasive, even unpleasant to do. And your system requires families and children going forward to test themselves twice at home every week. The Royal Statistical Society and others have suggested that people simply won't do it, and if they do, you may not get the accurate answers in the school. If it's so important, why don't you have this happening in schools with volunteers so we can be absolutely sure what's going on?
So, Andrew, we've already been rolling out testing over the last few weeks, and we've seen in education settings the highest take-up of testing either within the schools or within the home of any employment settings of anywhere around the country. So we're already doing it. We're seeing tests going out there. It is working, but it is just one of those extra layers of we're offering there. And actually, young people really do take a very responsible approach. They recognise that by doing these tests, that they are helping others and they are protecting their own family and they're protecting their own friends. And I think we've really got to give them some credit for what they're doing. And on visits that I've just had over the last week to schools, talking to children who have gone through that process, and you're right, it's you would rather people not be in a position to have to test, but they recognise it's a really important part of helping them get back into school at the earliest possible moment. And there's going to be literally millions more tests that are going to be rolled out across the country that would never have happened if we hadn't have had this programme. It's it's such an important part of what we're doing. And
let's talk about the challenge. Let's talk about the challenge going ahead. Let's talk about the challenge going ahead, because this is going to be an absolutely massive one, particularly in the so-called attainment gap between children from the poorer families and children from better off families. The Education Endowment Fund said back in the summer, just talking about the first lockdown, that school closures would widen the attainment gap between disadvantaged children and their peers, reversing the progress made to the gap since 2011. So over 10 years, reversing 10 years of progress. And that's just the first lockdown, never mind the second one. This is a huge, huge challenge. Are you levelling with people about it?
Well, Andrew, you're right to highlight the enormous challenges here, and this is probably why this is why myself and so many other people came into politics, because actually what you want to do is you want to eradicate that attainment gap. And what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to look at transformative measures within our education system.
Which I'm going to come on to those. I'm going to
address some of those problems, and this is why we've already invested £1.7 billion in terms of actions such as targeted tutoring.
Gavin Williamson, I'm going to come on to those transformative measures in a moment, but just before I do, I'm aware that there are a lot of people watching television this morning and thinking to themselves, that Gavin Williamson, he's not quite the right man for this job. Are you sure that you are?
Well, Andrew, what my focus is always on is delivering the very best for children, whether that's extra resources going into school, but most importantly, making sure children are back into the classroom. So that's where I want to see my children. I think that's where most of your viewers want to. That's where my focus is. That's what we're going to be delivering next week. That's what we're going to be delivering tomorrow.
Let me remind people why I might just have said that, because people remember very vividly back around Christmas when you said schools were going to stay open and then a day later you closed them. They will remember the absolute exam chaos over the summer and the terrible scenes in British universities, and that all happened on your watch. And they perhaps think, when it comes to the big decisions, Gavin Williamson has not been taking the right decisions.
Well, Andrew, we've been dealing with a global pandemic, and we've had to deal with whether it's new variants emerging and other challenges sort of presenting itself. But at every stage, my focus has been doing what is right for children. So I'll be always the first one to want to see schools remain open. I'll always be the first one to want to see children in schools. And I will never make an apology for wanting to keep our schools open and children having the benefit of a brilliant education in front of their teacher. So that passion for education, passion for delivering for children is what drives me in this job, and what will be driving me to make sure that children are back in school tomorrow.
I wonder if you regret cancelling exams this year. We know that teachers are now going to set the grades, and experts on all sides suggest this will inevitably result in grade inflation because teachers know their children and their children's families and lean in that direction. And yet you have not put in place a robust system to combat that. Does that not mean that this exam system will be unlike any other and will not produce robust, fair and usable results?
Well, Andrew, the first approach to assessment would always be through exams. It's quite simply the best form of assessment that we can do. But when we're not in a position to be able to run exams, we do need to make sure that we have the very best alternatives. We work very widely, not just with teaching profession.
But
and
you could have put in
leaders.
Ofsted inspectors and retired teachers to invigilate this and keep an eye on it, and you haven't done that.
But what we've done is we've made the decision to put our trust and confidence in teachers. All the teachers I speak to, as I'm sure the ones that you do, recognise how important this is to get right. This is why we've put, very clear guidance and structures around the awarding of grades. But on top of that, we're also putting a very, very sort of quality, very detailed quality assurance system, both internally within schools, but also an external quality assurance system that we're putting there with the exam board. So randomised sampling,
I'm going to ask you. I'm sorry, we're almost out of time here. I'm going to ask you, I'm afraid, for a one-word answer. Do you think we should extend the school day?
I think we should be evidence-based, and we're looking at that. We're looking at how the school year runs. We're looking at how we can boost teacher quality.
So the one word is perhaps, perhaps. Gavin Williamson, thanks very much indeed for talking to us today. That's all from me this morning. Thanks to all of my guests, and thanks, of course, to you for watching. I'll be back here next week at 9 o'clock when I'll be joined by Kelly MacDonald. She is the latest star to join the cast of everybody's favourite police drama, Line of Duty. But until then, goodbye.